His bishop is still bad. I still have this pin on his knight, and life is looking pretty good. So my bishops crisscross applesauce, prevent the black king from getting closer. This is round 3 of the Annville Quads, a local event here in central Pennsylvania. And in this third round, I'm playing against this 8-year-old Murthvik. On the rise to greatness. He's going to be way better than me in like 2 years. But as of now, I have a high ground. I have the high ground metaphorically and literally. In this case, I'm much taller. So in this game, I played e4. This is what I usually play. I've been testing out the ready in online games, but I'm mainly an e4 player, and he plays e5. And one thing about Murthvik is that he was playing very, very quickly throughout this game, and it's actually a big storyline here. There's a lot of pressure on the clock. Very traditional opening here, and he plays bishop c5 after I play the Italian, so which means this is the Gyokyo piano. Fun fact. C3 and D3 would make it the Gyokyo pianissimo. Fun fact. Sound smart at school. And I play C3, and after knight of 6, I like to just go for this gambit line with D4. I'm not really sure what the actual name of this is. Sometimes I see this being called like the Greco gambit sometimes. Sometimes it's just called the center attack. But yeah, point is, white is striking the center immediately and usually for the cost of a pawn. So he takes, I take, and then the best way to get out of it for black is go bishop b4 check. And there's a lot of theory here. There's also another option here too. White could also go e5, an in-between move, counter-attacking the knight, and then black usually goes d5, and then like the game goes on from here. I think this is one of the main ways for the game to continue. So there's lots of different ways. It's very theoretical. But I don't go for e5. I go for the recapture. And then after check, there's another move here, knight c3. This is also very theoretical because you allow yourself into this pin. You give up a pawn. But it's supposed to be okay for white. I should go knight bd2. And I like playing it because most of the time people aren't very familiar with the move. And if they accept the gambit, you get a lot of initiative, and it's very, very fun. It's a very, very fun line. I've been really enjoying it. And so if Murthvik did take on e4, then I would play d5, force the knight away, and I have this extra space, and usually I'll have the bishop pair as well. So it's a very fun gambit line for sure. But instead of taking this pawn, Murthvik just takes my knight. And then I take back with the bishop. I considered taking back with the knight, for example, defending my e4 pawn. But I was like, is this really better to keep my e4 pawn and then lose my d4 pawn? And my conclusion was no. I'm developing my knight backwards, and I'm losing my d4 pawn. Why do that? I'm just going to take with the bishop. And if he wants to take the e4 pawn, I still have this idea of d5, displacing his knight from this good square, and you don't have any forward moves because of my knight and my bishop. And if he does take, I could even consider castling queenside and just attacking him down the board super, super aggressively and all that jazz. So I take with the bishop, and he doesn't even take the pawn. And doesn't even play d5, which I've seen d5 a lot. d5 is definitely a very, very common move. Striking in the center, gaining space, opening up the door for your bishop. A very, very common way to play. And then he plays d6, which is definitely a mistake because that allows me to go d5 myself. I'm gaining space. I'm displacing his knight from c6. And after he moves it, he could go to e7 maybe. Still doesn't feel that great, but maybe I'll go queen c2, rook c1, maybe castles queenside, and I'm going to try to pile up, probably not castles queenside, probably just rook c1 and try to pile up pressure on this c7 pawn. And I have easy development and easy moves to play. But he goes knight e5 instead, which is also totally fine for me because I'm just going to take, and then I castle. I actually debated on whether or not I should castle immediately or play queen c2 or f3 first. I honestly wasn't really sure. I ended up choosing to castle though because if he did take on e4, I would go rook e1 or queen e2. I wasn't sure, to be honest. And if he defends himself with the pawn, for example, then f3, and no matter where the knight moves, I'm going to take this pawn with check, forcing the king to move. And I was like, okay, if he can't castle, that's probably a good thing. Even if I get this isolated d pawn, it's probably still fine for me, as if it means that he can't castle. But who knows? Maybe just defending the pawn and not allowing any complications with knight e4 is better. But I thought it can't be that bad, so I just castled. And then he castled. And around this time, I still had a lot of time on the clock, around 38 minutes, and so did he. I mean, he probably had closer to 39 minutes at this point. So we're playing very, very quickly here. And it's a game in 40 per side. So 40 minutes per side with a 5-second delay. And this becomes very, very relevant as the time goes on. I play f3, and I have this awesome connect 4. Like, firstly, I win the game. It is connect 4. But secondly, like, this pawn chain is really, really unbreakable here. And he cannot make the same pawn chain if he moves a knight and plays f6, because then there might be some discoveries with pushing this d pawn to d6, and this bishop gains more scope on this diagonal here. So my pawn chain is very, very strong. And he ends up going bishop g7, and I go bishop g5. It just felt like a good improving move. I'm not sure if bishop g5 is the best move, but I honestly thought it couldn't be bad. Like, rook c1 is definitely another alternative move. He would probably still play c6 like in the game. And, I mean, the game just goes on here. Maybe... I don't really see the difference too much with the rook on c1. Maybe I could have played queen b3 instead. I'm not sure. There's definitely different... There's definitely different options here. But I wasn't too concerned. And bishop g5 just felt right. It's going to be really hard for him to break this pin on the knight. Like, for example, h6 and even g5. Well, now I'm staring at the e-pawn. And if you ever move your rook, well, I can go queen b3 and maybe thread in discoveries to take the pawn. I'm not super sure. But anyways, h6 and g5 is super committal moves by him anyways. Like, you would have to... That's committing a lot to play g5. Especially allowing... You're allowing me to play h4, which I don't know if it's a good move here or not. But it's definitely something that you would have to consider. But he just plays h6, forcing my bishop to go back, and then plays c6. So he doesn't commit to g5, but he does play c6, which makes a lot of sense. You're trying to fight for more space. You're fighting... I have these two pawns really are restricting black's position here. So I end up deciding to take. I actually thought for a long time on what I should do. One of the things I was considering was taking the knight and then taking this pawn. And let's say, well, he has to take with the bishop, because if he takes with the pawn, of course, he loses the bishop. I guess he could take with the queen. That just feels so unnatural, though. But yeah, I guess he could if he wanted to. But let's say he takes with the bishop. Like, this, my bishop is definitely better than his bishop. And, like, I feel like I'm the only one that could be better in this position, because his bishop is staring into a brick wall of my pawns. That being said, though, I wasn't convinced how winning this was. It looks more drawish than it is winning. So I just decided to keep this tension here. And if he wants to break the pin himself, he has to commit to that move. So I decided to just not trade. But I did take the c6 pawn, because after the bishop takes, his bishop is still bad. I still have this pin on his knight, and life is looking pretty good. And I just decided to go queen b3, and he ends up making the move queen b6 check, forcing a trade of queens here. And I thought this was absolutely wild to do. Like, one way that he could get out of it, like, for example, after c6 and takes it, he could have gone queen b6 check. And after king moves, he could take with the queen, I suppose. Yeah, I guess he could go for this. And if I take, he cannot take with the queen because of this. So we have to double pawns like this. I guess he could have gone for this. But it's not... I don't think it's that much better than what happened in the game. But my point is, I'm not really sure if this was really necessary. But he decides to go for it. And he offers me a draw somewhere around here. I think after rook ad8, he offers me a draw. And, I mean, like, it's... Yeah, I mean, it's definitely an equal material, and black's position is solid. But I don't know, the weaknesses are starting to pile on. These doubled pawns, this bad knight, this weak e pawn potentially, this f pawn is a target as well. Like, it's definitely not easy for white to win, but I don't know. Like, white definitely seems like it has chances here. I would never accept a draw here. Unless I had like 2 seconds, then I would accept the draw, I suppose. I play b4. One of the ideas behind that is that, like, let's say he plays a lazy move like king h7, then b5 is going to dislodge the bishop from c6, and it's going to fix this b6 pawn on a dark square. So let's say after b5, then bishop d7, and now bishop f8, and there's no way for you to defend that pawn. If you traded first and went bishop e8, then that looks absolutely horrible. It looks absolutely horrible. One thing I could consider is just to take and then go here, or take and then go here and fork the pawns like this. And your bishop, what's your bishop doing on e8? That looks absolutely horrible. So that's one of the ideas behind b4, and he responds with b5. One benefit of making him commit to the move b5 is that now his bishop cannot go to that square ever. And now his bishop is stuck behind its own pawn and staring at the brick wall of my pawn chain. So it felt like b4 felt like a really, really great move to me, and I'm very, very proud of it. And I just play bishop b3, keeping an eye on this diagonal and guarding my a2 pawn. So if the rook ever goes to a8, my pawn is always well defended. He goes rook f e8, preemptively guarding the pawn, and just seems like a pretty simple developing move. Nothing crazy. He didn't think that much about it. And I played bishop f2. I decided, okay, this pin was useful, but I don't need it anymore. And I'm going to force his rook off of the d file, so now I'll have the only control over the d file. And he ends up playing rook a8 voluntarily before I can even put my bishop there on b6 to force his rook off. One interesting idea is knight d7, guarding the b6 and the c5 squares. But if you do knight d7, now that gives me free reign to go rook d6 and then rook fd1 to double up on this file, and then maybe later I can still play this idea of bishop g6, or maybe even bishop g3 to target the pawn while this pawn is pinned. So it definitely doesn't feel right to allow me to double with knight d7, but maybe it's a way to try to defend. I'm not really sure. I'm not really sure. And maybe even after knight d7 and rook here, I could even go like bishop h4. And if you commit to g5, then maybe this h pawn will be weak as well. So there's some ideas like that for sure. But he voluntarily goes to a8. And I just, okay, I'm going to start doubling up on this d file. He moves his other rook to d8, and I just double up. He trades and then plays this kind of annoying move in knight e8. And his position, to his credit, is very solid. It's actually, like, I have no infiltration squares in his position. This square is covered by the rook. This square is covered by the bishop. This d6, the square the rook is already on right now, is covered by the knight. This square is covered by the rook, or by the bishop, I mean, and this square is covered by the pawn. So it's like very hard to actually infiltrate. But that being said, I'm still better. My pieces have more scope than his pieces, and I have the bishop pair. I have the only open file. Like, the position can't get much better for me. And, you know, if I can't win this position, then I can't win any position. You know, he plays king f8. I go bishop c5 check, forcing his king back. So he kind of wasted a move there. And now I bring my king forward. He plays g6. I bring my king forward again. And one of my ideas in this position was, like, let's say he plays a move like h5, for example. I might consider going g3 and f4. And now my king has more ability to maneuver around and maybe slowly get to the c5 and b6 squares, so I can attack these pawns and maybe even win one of these weak pawns. Like, if I can force a bishop trade and then, like, I can bring my king over to the king side, this is very, very good for me. Like, these pawns are going to be really, really hard to defend. While my a2 pawn is well guarded by my bishop, and even if I trade off my bishop, my rook guards the a2 pawn, and my bishop guards the b4 pawn really well, and his knight is very clumsy on the back rank. So I definitely should be better in this position. That's my feeling. But after king e3, he played the move king g7, and I decided to play it slowly, play this position very, very slowly with bishop e7, cutting off the king from going to f6, and even if he moves this f pawn, the bishop cuts the king off from getting to the f file. So my bishops crisscross applesauce, prevent the black king from getting closer, which is very, very cool. And around this position, move 29-ish, I had, yeah, about 12 minutes. And he had about like 30 minutes. More like 27 minutes, actually, according to this timestamp. He plays f5, and it was a kind of an interesting move. I'm actually kind of proud of the way I played. I took the pawn and then played g3. I don't want him to allow him, let's say I play a lazy move like rook d1, to go f4 check, and the pawns and the bishop really block out the white king from entering the position. So I definitely don't want to allow that to happen. So I like the move g3. So if he goes f4 now, well, he just loses a pawn, which is very good for me. And he ended up going king g6. And now I kind of forced the issue with his pawns by playing the move f4. And I really thought he might consider e4, because it does give him a protected passed pawn that will always be a liability for me. That could always be an issue for me. But if he did play e4, that would allow my king to go forward, like legitimately. My king can just waltz on forward into the position, play king c5, play bishop d5, and the rook can't go here because of my bishop on e7, and it feels very, very, very good. I'd be very, very happy if he committed his pawn to e4. Even though it is a passed pawn, it's not very dangerous as of now. So after f4, he ends up playing, he just takes, which honestly makes my position even nicer, because he has these two isolated pawns on the queen side, and he has these two isolated pawns on the king side. And I'm like, yeah, he's got weaknesses everywhere. There's no possible way for him to hold now. At least that was my feeling. Well, one thing to be aware of, just like conceptually, is that like if we traded off all the king side pawns, and it was my two pawns on the queen side versus his two pawns on the queen side, it's definitely a draw. It's like almost assuredly a draw, because like with the pawns on the same side of the board, it's going to be easy for him to use his resources to defend. But with his resources spread out all over the board, now it's going to be much harder for him to coordinate. So it's very important for me to not trade off all the kingside pawns. And that's just like a small idea that you should be aware of in a position like this. He plays h5. I think he wanted to prevent bishop c2 and then g4, taking advantage of the pin on the king. And I play h3, with the idea that after he makes a move and he plays rook a6, I can play bishop c2, and one of my ideas was after knight g7, I could play g4, taking advantage of this pin. But after takes, he has this move knight check here. Yeah, he has this knight check. It looks kind of annoying, but looking at it now, it doesn't look that bad. Not sure what I was worried about. But I did end up going, instead of playing g4 in this position to try to take advantage of this pin, I just played bishop b3. I went bishop back. Also important to note that after bishop c2, he can never take this a2 pawn, because I have a discovered check, and I win the rook on a2. So that a2 pawn is never hanging. But anyways, I play bishop c2, and I go back to b3, and he plays knight e8. I mean, he's more than happy to take a draw in this position. I think he would really enjoy that for sure. And probably around bishop b3, yep, I had 6 minutes, and he had about 20 minutes. So I was getting lower and lower on the clock here, but I was also pretty confident because I knew my position was very, very good. I played king e5. So now after I move my bishop and after knight g7, the king would be 2 diagonal squares away from the knight on g7, and there's no way for the knight to check the king. Like, very interesting geometry here is that when any piece is 3 squares in front of a knight, it's very hard for the knight to check that piece, or to attack that piece, I should say. So a bishop that is 3 squares ahead of a knight is very good, or if this was a pawn instead, it would be very restrictive on the knight's movement. So just a small geometric note there. He ends up playing bishop d4, or bishop e4, I should say, which seems totally fine. And I played bishop d8. One thing I was worried about was, like, with my bishop lose on e7, it's not defended by anything. So if I get lazy and, like, let's say knight g7, let's say h5, knight g7, and, like, I don't know, rook d1. Now this is just a fork. Although in this case my bishop's guarding. Like, let's say I go like bishop d1, then like this would be a fork. And so yeah, I was like, okay, my bishop on e7 feels kind of loose. I want to play this position very slowly, so I'm just gonna play bishop d8. It seemed reasonable enough, and it's not so easy for him to make a move. Like, let's say if he goes back to b6, honestly, I could even consider going king e6, and if he does some sort of discover check, then I can just run my king all the way down, attack his knight, which is kind of silly. I'm not sure if I would actually do this or not, but it's kind of silly to think about it. So I ended up going bishop d8, which I think is a completely solid move. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. And he finally moves his knight to g7, but this allows me to play rook d6, forcing a rook trade, and life is going pretty good. Surprisingly, he actually took my rook. I wasn't actually sure if he was actually going to do that, because now his pawns are still doubled. For example, let's say he went king h7, and if I took, now this pawn is really strong, and he only has to guard the a6 pawn. It's still probably losing though. Like, maybe I can go bishop d5 here, and I'm just going to play bishop b7 next if he doesn't take my bishop. And if he plays here, for example, I just go here and then go here. So it's still probably losing for him, but so surprised he didn't really consider that. Instead, he just traded immediately and then played king h6. I will never be able to explain to you king h6. King h6 does not make any sense. Also, I stopped notating at this point. After bishop d8, I stopped notating because I had too little time. So this is all from memory, but I'm very confident I got it right. But yeah, he played king h6 here, and I was just absolutely baffled. This move does absolutely nothing. To be fair, to his credit, this position sucks. And there's really not much to do. The bishops are so strong, crisscross applesaucing black's position, restricting the knight's movement, and preventing the king from getting any closer. So honestly, like, it's reasonable because he's just making moves very, very fast, and there's not many moves to make. But still, I just, like, there's got to be a better move than king h6, right? Anyways, I move my king forward, and I thought he would try to hold the position together with a move like bishop b6. Or bishop c6, I mean, guarding the b5 pawn. If he did do that, I could always consider a bishop d5, and I'm just going to, forcibly remove his light squared bishop and then win the pawns slowly but surely. Instead, he just plays knight e8, allowing me to take on b5, and then he goes knight d6 check, and after I can move my king, he has no good. If this b pawn wasn't here, he would have knight b7 check, forking my king and bishop, and I would just be down a piece. Luckily, his b pawn is there, so he does not have that tactic, thankfully for myself. But he goes back to knight e8 since he doesn't have any other checks, and I play bishop d5, either winning the d pawn or forcing a trade of bishops. Both are good for me. And he finally moves his king now, and I just push my pawn. Like, I got a 2-on-1, and I'm just going to promote and win the game. And he still can't move his king closer because of my bishops, so he decides to take now. Not much to do, so I don't blame him. And here I'm getting lower and lower in time. I probably have about a minute on the clock, probably. I play a5. He finally moves his knight. I'm getting my pawns rolling. He played knight e6, attacks my bishop. I might be able to just give up my bishop with move a6. Like, for example, knight takes a7. Like, this could definitely be a possibility. I did not want to calculate, though. Honestly, this is really, really interesting. For example, a4, h4 now, and if I take, then f4, promote, f3, but I get out in time, I think, and I'm able to stop the pawn from promoting. That's super interesting. That would have been a bit scary if I did that. But I just play it simple. I play simple chess. I play bishop b6, and once again, my bishop 3 squares away from the knight, and doing a really good job of controlling the knight's movements here. So very, very nice. And this pawn also controls this knight's movement. And he plays h4, forcing this pawn to move and allowing his pawn to go towards the finish line there to become a new queen. I play a6. Very, very simple chess. I'm just pushing my pawn down the board. And we trade, and he plays this move, f3. If I could play a very, very bad move in this position. I could play h5. This still is probably winning for white, but now there's a move knight c7, and I cannot take because of f2. And he's promoting first. And like I said, this might still be winning. I actually don't think it is. For example, a7, f1 promotion, a8 queen, check. Uh-oh, you're losing your queen, and you're probably going to lose the game. So I have to play a7 here. So now after knight c7 check, I can move my king, and my a pawn isn't hanging. In the earlier position, after if I played h5, then knight c7, and after the king moves, knight takes pawn, and this could be winning. Probably not, because the king gets to h7. But honestly, my bishop does do a good job against the knight, but I'm not convinced it's good enough. For example, yeah, this cannot be good. This cannot be good. This has got to be a draw, right? Not sure. Anyways, it's not what I want. As the person with the white pieces, I definitely do not want that. So I push a7, and I just move my king. And to stop promotion, he has to put his knight in the corner. And if I get lazy and just bring my king forward, well, now it gets a bit more complicated, and we both promote, which would be bad news bears for me. That would be very, very bad. So after knight a8, I have to bring my bishop back. I don't even give him the opportunity to push the pawn. And yeah, his knight's trapped on the edge of the board. He moves his king. I move my king. He moves his king. Or he moves his knight. Moves his king again. I promote. And I'm going to checkmate him from here. I play this final move, queen d7. Only one legal move. And then it's checkmate. And I finished the game with 20 seconds on the clock, I think. 20 seconds. So not a lot of time to end the game with, but luckily I think I did a good job converting it, and there wasn't too many issues there. But yeah, it was an interesting game. He's like one of the best 8-year-old boys in the country, so props to him for sure. And yeah, that was a very interesting game. I ended the tournament with 2 points out of 3. And I hope to do better in the next one. So I think I probably gained like 1 point or 2 points or something like that. I still lost the game, so we'll see. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you guys in the next one. I'm going to hit the game review.